Revenge is a dish best served at the cinema.
I'm gonna make this real simple. Make your daddy dead. Real dead.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today I'm going to be reviewing a new film called Is God Is, which is written and directed by Aleshea Harris, based on her 2018 play of the same name. I was not aware of the fact that this was based on a play until after I had seen the film. I try not to look up too much information beforehand to avoid spoilers. The first section of this film will be mostly spoiler-free, although I will talk about some things that are shown in the trailer, which I am assuming you've already seen if you're bothering to watch this review. After the spoiler-free section, we will talk about spoilers, but I will let you know before we get into those details, and I will also label these two sections with timestamps. The premise of Is God Is that you have twin sisters, Racine and Anaya. The sisters have scars from an incident when they were younger in which both of them ended up burned to varying degrees. Racine is scarred, but it's mostly on one of her hands, whereas Anaya is more heavily scarred across more of her body and face. They have a very close relationship with one another. One day, they are contacted by their mother, Ruby, who is played by Vivica A, who is even more substantially covered in burn scars. She informs the girls that these scars come from the girl's father, who is only credited on IMDb with the character name Man, in quotation marks. But on Letterboxd, he's credited as the Monster. Monster was highly abusive and intentionally set Ruby on fire. Now, her dying wish is for her daughters to hunt down Monster, and as the poster says, make your daddy dead. Real dead. This is the feature film directorial debut of Aleshea Harris, and with that in mind, I think she's done very well. If you are new here, I am someone who judges films differently if it's a directorial debut, because typically those directors are working with less resources, less experience, and in general, I think it's important to not only judge those films for what they are on their own merits, but also to look at them as a potential springboard of what those directors could do if we as the audience support their debut to enough of an extent that they are able to leverage that success to get funding for whatever their next film project is. There was some incredibly thoughtful, nuanced storytelling for this very serious subject matter, but I was also really impressed by how stylish the filmmaking and editing was, relative to the fact that this is a filmmaker whose experience up until this point has largely been as a playwright and not as a film director. Not only for the play version of Is God Is, but other written works as well. There were some stylish choices with things like using split screens to show each of the twins, which is a fitting choice, and despite the fact that I'm assuming the budget for a film like this was limited, it was still able to look fairly cinematic in its overall presentation. For example, without being overly specific just yet, when a new setting was introduced, they were cutting from one room to the next to really show you the space of where this next part of the story was going to take place, and it looked really good. Much of the flashback material was in a sort of black and white presentation, but there would be these few deliberate splashes of color here and there. The performances were all excellent. With the knowledge of the director having been a playwright, I feel as though you could probably get the sense that she was directing the actors to really go all out with these performances. Don't hold back, don't favor an overly subtle delivery, be bold in your emotional expression, and absolutely every performer was giving it their all. Not just the primary characters either. There was one scene where there were a lot of smaller, unnamed characters, as in the audience doesn't know those characters' names, but everyone in that ensemble was fully committing to what that scene was asking of them, and I enjoyed seeing what they all brought to even those smaller, unnamed parts. Many of the established actors with the more high-profile credits to their name are only present for smaller portions of the film's story. Much of what we're following is the twins going on this journey together. Thus, the onus is on them to carry the film, but thankfully they are more than up to the task. Cara Young and Mallori Johnson, if you didn't already know who they were before this, I would recommend that you learn their names now and remember them because they do incredible work in portraying the vast range of emotional highs and lows that these two sisters go through together. Cara Young, I knew she looked familiar, I knew that I had seen her before, and then I had the thought, hold on, wasn't she in I'm a Virgo? And guess what? Yes, she was. She looked very different, but you know what? I love a transformative actor, I really do. I'm a Virgo was phenomenal, by the way. That was Boots Riley's television series from a couple of years ago. If you haven't already seen it, I highly recommend it. Cara Young is also set to be appearing in Boots Riley's next project, which is his feature film I Love Boosters, which is one of, if not my absolute #1 most anticipated film of this entire year. Now, I will be away when that film releases. I already tried reaching out a while ago to ask about whether or not they would be giving access to early press screeners. They did not provide anything, sadly, so I will have to review it when I come back. Regardless of the fact that I will not be able to review it on opening weekend, please come back to my channel and listen to me talk about I Love Boosters, because I'm really looking forward to that, and I want that to be a communal experience of all of us together, reveling in the genius of Boots Riley. But anyway, Cara Young and Mallori Johnson are not twins in real life, but they have the unique challenge of playing what amounts to a yin and yang, the id and the superego. Now, I'm not a Freud stan, but sometimes it's a useful model to use when analyzing fictional characters, their behavior, and relationships. There are these moments of softer emotional intimacy within this sisterhood, but there are also these explosive outbursts of rage and pain because of all that they've been through, not only to end up with these physical scars, but all of the pain that came afterwards and how that shaped them into the people we're following through this story. The layered storytelling works to the film's benefit. There is the surface level entertainment of family drama, action, revenge, but each character the twins encounter opens up a whole new avenue for deeper analysis. We will be going through more of those details in the spoiler section. There's also a good balance struck with how much or how little violence they choose to put on screen. The subject matter of things like intense domestic violence, generational trauma, it can get intense at times, but I definitely noticed that there were intentional choices made to, at times, not show violence or not overly draw out certain violence. And I appreciated this choice because I have grown extremely burnt out from seeing gratuitous, senseless violence in films that are making a spectacle out of that violence simply for the sake of it. It doesn't mean that I'm incapable of watching films that contain violence and still find something to enjoy in them, but I'm pickier now about when I think it feels like too much. If you have deeper layers and themes for me to dig into, that will go a long way, and I would say that Is God Is does offer that. That being said, my one asterisk would be that if you are a viewer who is mentally or emotionally in a place of being especially sensitive to things like domestic violence or violence within a family, proceed at your own discretion. It gets intense at times, but overall, I do rate the film favorably, and I would love to see what else Aleshea Harris could do as a filmmaker. I hope Is God Is becomes successful enough for her to be able to have that opportunity.
This seems a little crazy.
Not as crazy as setting your wife on fire in front of your kids, then abandoning them.
Now, let's get into spoilers. The film introduces us to the twins as young children. It's a flashback in which some of the other children at school insult Anaya's appearance as she is the more visibly scarred of the twins. Racine responds by picking up a baseball bat and disappearing off screen. We can hear the sounds of her attacking the children who have insulted Anaya, but we never actually see her committing that violence. When she walks back into frame, the only thing that's in color is the blood splatter. Very artistic, very Pleasantville, but turned on its axis. That's one of a few examples of this artistic choice of removing most of the color from flashbacks, but then having a splash of color that draws the eye towards something specific and what that might represent or mean. In this opening scene, you could interpret that in any number of ways. They are connected by blood as twin sisters, but it's also the first of a significant amount of blood that will be shed throughout their shared story. Beyond just the visually stylish elements of this opening, though, this is a matter-of-fact way of introducing us to their relationship dynamic. People are constantly being cruel and overly judgmental towards Anaya, and Racine is always quick to step up and protect her. It's a dynamic that follows them into our introduction to them as adults. They are working at an office, but when a woman is rude to Anaya, Racine steps up to defend her, and their supervisor disapproves of this behavior, so the two of them are fired. Racine receives a letter from their mother, whom the twins had believed to be dead. When they go to visit her, they learn that she is even more badly burned and scarred than they are. She let the twins believe that she was dead because she didn't think that she could provide them with the care that they would need as children, and it would be too traumatic for them to have a mother as visibly scarred as her. Now that they know that she's alive, they're eager to reconnect, but what they learn upon visiting her, again, is that the reason they're all scarred is, well, what you've probably already seen from the trailer. The abusive father of the twins, who is played by Sterling K. Brown, he tracked them down one day, he showed up, despite their mother having a restraining order against him. He attacked her, he set her on fire, and the twins end up with scars of their own. That was something that he didn't explicitly intend to do, but nonetheless, it happened. They were young enough when this happened to not remember how they got scarred or the details of what happened until they're reunited with their mother as adults and she tells them the story. Once they accept their mother's revenge quest, this is when we start to get more momentum with the story and a more blatant presentation of the ideological differences between the sisters. I love to dig into layered storytelling, and Is God Is definitely has an abundance of that. The central moral dilemma of this story is whether or not it's more ethical to go after this man or simply leave him be and carry on with your own life. The story presents a lot of information to support both sides of this, and the sisters represent the two options. Racine is described by one of the characters as being like her father, and the similarities are things like her anger and propensity for violence. She has little to no hesitation about going after him. Anaya, on the other hand, is the more sensitive and quiet of the two. She is hesitant to engage in violence. She regularly discourages Racine from being violent and seems to harbor more guilt and a stronger moral compass about the issue of going after their father, as well as the violence that spreads outside of this one person they're going after. What I appreciate is that it's not an overly simplistic story about one sister being completely right and the other sister being completely wrong. They give both of these perspectives their fair share of consideration and interrogation. As much as is possible, the narrative is unpacking the layers of both of those perspectives. The further you go through the story and the journey of these sisters, the more that you learn about this father character, the trail of violence and cruelty that he has left in his wake, other people that have been used, abused, discarded, beyond just this first trio of women we've met at the beginning, that being the twins and their mother. Moreover, they are not the only children he has fathered. We learn that there are at least 3 others, all boys, and all 3 of those boys are eventually revealed to have a similar propensity for violence against women as their father. The father isn't a lone villain of one story. He's representative of a larger epidemic of a culture and system that enacts and upholds violence against women in particular, though we see at least one man whom he has also been violent towards, that being his lawyer, whom he violently attacked after this lawyer helped him win his legal case for the crime of almost killing Vivica A. Fox's character. This means that the story is providing plenty of evidence for the fact that the system will not hold him accountable, and he is spreading this violence to other victims, as well as creating more abusive men to follow his legacy. Racine's determination to fulfill this vengeance quest is valid because of those reasons. However, on the Anaya side of things, the film introduces and repeatedly emphasizes this message of how trying to inflict violence against someone, it's incredibly risky to pursue that task, and by being willing to become violent enough to do what is required of the twins in this revenge quest, they are risking that their father might not be the only one to get caught up in the bloodshed that's about to ensue. Moreover, there's a deeper idea in play here that by engaging in this violence, that can eat away at your soul. I don't know if that's necessarily something that's explicitly stated in the dialogue, but it feels like a clear undercurrent in how the sisters clash over their approach to tracking down their father to make him dead. I would like to go through some of the main beats of the story in these different stages of the twins tracking down different people and following leads, and some of my thoughts on these exchanges they have with other characters. First, I also want to mention that I really like how old-fashioned the aesthetic of the film feels. Although, from what I can recall, it didn't seem as though they were aiming to be an outright period piece. In some ways, it felt like one at times because of how rarely characters would use overly modern technology like mobile phones, with them having to investigate leads on their father's whereabouts and trying to track him down. Instead of us having to watch them sit around and look things up online, they're actually going out into the world to find people either at home or where they work. I'm all for more films simply not having mobile phones in them or using them sparsely that they're hardly there because it can often end up feeling impersonal to simply watch characters sit around texting or looking at apps. The first person they go to see after their mother is Divine, the woman who their father was dating after and during the trial for a bit. She's played by Erica Alexander, who does an absolutely fabulous job. She infuses the perfect amount of unhinged into her characterization. Divine is a pastor of a church that she runs out of her house, and the way that she speaks about the twins' father, and the way that she is still revering this man and hoping that he will return for her and the son that he fathered, it was such a clever, unapologetic call-out of this larger cultural phenomenon of men who get in trouble for some sort of toxic, abusive, criminal behavior, and then they will use the church as a way of attempting to launder their image and reputation. Now, I do not say that as an anti-religion sentiment, because not every church of every religion is doing this, but it is a thing that has and continues to happen. I could give you examples of celebrity men who have done this, as several of them come to mind, but I don't want the dialogue of this review to devolve down a path of arguing about whether or not this or that celebrity man is sincere about their newfound faith. The point is that there is this symbiotic relationship dynamic we've seen play out more than once, and it's not just about these men being deceptive and perfectly ethical religious houses are being bamboozled. The way that this is called out in the film, but also in the larger discourse that happens about yet another celebrity man or public figure attempting to do this, is such that those churches are also criticized for being institutions that enable toxic, violent patriarchy with little to no regard for how that harms many other people, and in particular, how it harms more vulnerable groups of people such as women and children. The film is holding up a mirror to that dynamic because Divine, she is eventually confronted in this conversation for knowing very well what this man did, why he was on trial, yet she was perfectly happy to support him despite the fact that he has no real remorse for what he did. And we as the audience know that to be the case because he outright tells his lawyer after winning the trial that he's not interested in setting up visitation to see his twin daughters because he will feel tempted to finish the job. He also says to Anaya, when they're having a conversation near the very end of the film, a number of things that demonstrate that he holds no guilt for what he did to the three of them, and he is still blaming their mother for the fact that he violently attacked her and set her aflame. Evil, evil man, I'm glad he did not survive this movie. I do wonder whether or not Erica Alexander will talk about the real-life examples of the dynamic her character material is a commentary of, because it feels like a really contentious, divisive topic that will undoubtedly be discussed at length on social media, but maybe for a movie press tour, some of the actors may or may not want to provide the quotes that will launch a number of social media posts and videos of discourse about this or that topic. She played it perfectly, though, I will say that. Actually, come to think of it, with Sterling K. Brown being in this movie, does anyone remember that movie, Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul? The way that he and Regina Hall acted in that movie, there's a similar energy. It's this weirdly Stepfordian performative way of speaking, except Sterling and Regina were playing leaders of a megachurch, whereas Erica Alexander in Is God Is, she's running a much smaller church, but the line delivery and the energy behind her performance, there are similar threads woven into both sets of these performances. The next person the twins track down is their father's former lawyer, Chuck. He can no longer speak out loud because when their father attacked him in this random violent outburst, it caused Chuck to lose either part of or all of his tongue, so he mostly communicates by writing things down on a whiteboard. Some of what I liked about his portion of the story and what it represents are, for one, violent patriarchy doesn't only harm women and children. He is a man who was operating as a cog of the machine to protect an abusive man from accountability. And yet he was not spared. He lost the momentum of his professional career, he lost his ability to speak, and tragically, it was only by losing all of those things that he was really forced to reflect deeply on everything that happened and what he did. And he's the one who offers one of the most poignant lines of the film. It's when the twins are trying to get information from him on the whereabouts of their father, and he is trying to convince them not to do this. He writes a warning on his whiteboard to them, which is that vengeance could spread blood further than they intended. I don't know if I would say that this is the one and only theme of the film, but it's definitely a prominent one. You see that starting to play out in this scene as Racine has put a rock or rocks in a sock to use as a weapon if needed to obtain the information thereafter, but also the violence escalates significantly in the scenes and encounters that follow. Not only do they experience violence, they end up inflicting violence against more people than just their father once they reach where he now lives. I don't say that to declare some sort of clear moral framework on them about whether or not they were right or wrong in the exchanges that follow, but the story is clearly showing you that Chuck's warning was prophetic. The twins at most only really wanted to go after their father, but in the process of undertaking a violent vengeance quest, multiple other people end up injured or dead. That's a very nuanced approach towards addressing violence as a central topic, thematically, culturally, in a work of fiction. Oftentimes, violence isn't nuanced in Hollywood media. It can be a means to an end, it can be something decorative or used to create a spectacle, but Is God is forging a really unique path in trying to mine the layers of how the audience thinks about violence, both within artistic entertainment fiction, but also in real life. When is violence the correct choice? When is it the most ethical option? What are the risks and costs of engaging or not engaging in violence? If nothing else, it's one hell of a conversation starter. Again, I also want to reiterate that it's particularly impressive that the writing manages to be this interesting and layered within a debut feature film. Regardless of where I rank this film within my private 2026 list, or how I rate the film in comparison to a number of other films that are from more established filmmakers with far more resources, a film like Is God Is a prime example of what I love to see in debut feature films. It makes me root for those filmmakers even more to get additional opportunities to expand their creative and production ambitions in films that will hopefully follow. Once the twins finally reach the home where their father is now settled into a new life, we are introduced to his latest wife and his 2 sons. The new wife is played by Janelle Monáe, and listen, as a glass onion girly, I was beyond elated to see her. She had the outfits, she had the rich voice on.
The dog ate the caviar.
There you go.
More movies should have Janelle Monáe in them. That's not a hot take by any means, but I will say it anyway. The film wastes little time in letting us know that this father character hasn't changed. Janelle Monáe might not have the visible wounds that Vivica A. Fox has, but there is no denying that she's been terrorized. She has made preparations to run away, start a new life elsewhere, just to escape from this man. However, unbeknownst to her, his long-lost daughters arrive, and they did not perish in a tragic accident as she was led to believe. The confrontation that plays out between them is one of those lightning rod scenes that I know will get the audience talking, because it's yet another prime example of how the key word for this film is nuance. Is the new wife a victim? Yes, 100%. Does she lose her temper when the twins won't let her through and she espouses some classist rhetoric against them? Yes, she does. Are they dismissive of her victimhood because she has lived in a higher socioeconomic status than them? Yes, they do. Admittedly, more of the hostility is coming from Racine than it is Anaya, but either way, it's not as if Anaya is being extremely hands-on in trying to free the new wife so that she can go on her merry way. This is the first of the many deaths that are going to fall like cascading dominoes now that the twins have reached their primary destination. This is when the prophetic warning from Chuck, the lawyer, plays out just as he warned them it would. Things escalate quickly until the new wife is dead, and both of her sons also end up dead. A couple of noteworthy details about these half-brothers. Scotch is the more outwardly evil of the two. He is more obvious in his toxic misogyny, and when they're dead, their father expresses blatant favoritism towards him as the one who really would have been someone. The fake out that they do with his other brother, Riley, that was really interesting. It was subversive, but it also raises some interesting points about how even the men who might appear to be timid, polite, non-threatening are just as capable of perpetrating violence. I won't say that I was happy at seeing how Riley lashed out, but it is compelling writing, so I have to pay my compliments. Finally, after all of the waiting and build-up, when we finally have the worst family reunion of all time, the homecoming of the father, the monster himself, Sterling K. Brown. How very dare you act this part so well. He is so evil, manipulative, callous. I'm not going to be parasocial and presume to know how Sterling K. Brown is as a person in real life, but in the the few interviews and social media bits I've seen of him, he seems nice enough. Thus, the transformation of how well he embodies this character, how truly despicable this man is, you know he's an exceptional actor because I did not recognize any part of how he behaved in this film with anything I have seen of him in the aforementioned social media or interview bits I'm referencing. I was so tense and stressed out in each and every second he was on screen. Even when he's not speaking, the tension he carried in his body and how he would carry himself, ooh, it was truly nightmarish. In a way, the conversation and confrontation that happens before the big fight was more disturbing to watch because there was such a clear buildup and escalation focusing on physical violence up until that point that seeing him toy with Anaya like that, lure her into this false sense of security before attacking her, it was deeply upsetting. I will give the writing every bit of credit it's owed, but given the film's subject matter and how exceptional it is in its specificity and execution of fleshing out all of those facets of domestic violence and familial abuse, it's not the sort of film that I would want to rewatch as much. I'm glad it was made, though, because these are things that need to be addressed, and if you would like to use art as the medium to do that, then go for it, especially if you're going to be as thoughtful and artistic as this film is. The one final detail of the plot that I will briefly talk about is that, in the end, the twins do unto their father what he did to their mother. They get him into the bathtub and they set him aflame. When he abruptly snatched up Racine and she gets quite literally engulfed in the violent flames, narratively it made sense. It's what the diverging journeys of these twins has been building towards. It's the culmination of the warning from Chuck the lawyer that came much earlier on in the film. That being said, I would have liked for the film to run just a bit longer, to give the audience maybe one more minute of runtime to really sit in the emotional aftermath of what just happened. They have this fairly quick wrap-up of showing Anaya now after having given birth to her baby and resolved to give the baby a better life, presumably one that is far more functional than what she was able to experience. But this relationship between the twins was the heartbeat of the movie. All of their ups and downs, the profound love they have for one another, intertwined with this ideological, philosophical rift they experience. It feels like one of those details that could have been fine-tuned ever so slightly. The energy and momentum is so high octane in that final battle of the twins versus their father that I think it would have served the story and character journeys better if, as I said, we could have just had one more minute to process things before the end credits rolled. Nonetheless, I like this film quite a bit. It's definitely one of the better debuts I've seen recently. I have every hope that Aleshea Harris will be given more opportunities. I would be very interested in seeing what sort of stories she would like to tell next in the film medium if this one ends up being successful.